Catalina que me preste el guayo que la yuca se me está pasando. Dile a Catalina que me preste el guayo que la yuca se me está pasando. Dile a Catalina que me preste el guayo que la yuca se me está pasando. Mira, ven y baila, Catalina, con tu guayo ahora. Dile a Catalina que me preste el guayo que la yuca se me está pasando. Ay, Catalina, ven, ven, dame tu guayo, que la yuca se me está pasando. Dile a Catalina que me preste el guayo que la yuca se me está pasando. Mira, nena linda, pero ven, baila conmigo. Dile a Catalina que me preste el guayo que la yuca se me está pasando. Catalina que me preste guayo que la yuca se me está pasando. Se me está pasando. Amina, se me está pasando. Se me está pasando. Se me está pasando. Dile a Catalina que me preste el guayo que la yuca se me está pasando. Dile a Catalina que me preste el guayo que la yuca se me está pasando.
Oye, la gente se ha empeñado que yo estoy enfermo.
Canta el gallo de Moronzón Montuno.
No estoy destrozado como ustedes creen.
De Morón, por mi salud.
Señores, tengo que ir a ver a 2 o 3 doctores porque tengo unos dolores que no me dejan vivir. Cuando me acuesto a dormir me duele la rabadilla, la quijada, la rodilla, me da punzada un pulmón y para más salación padezco de pesadilla.
Canta el gallo de Moronzón Montuno. Canta el gallo de Morón por mi salud.
Tengo piedra en los riñones, catarata en la quijada, la columna desviada y estoy lleno de hinchazones. Me mandaron inyecciones para curarme el pulmón. Ahora me sale un flemón que me ha torcido el tobillo y además tengo sapillo, hígado con sarampión.
Canta el gallo de Moronzón Montuno. Canta el gallo de Morón por mi salud.
Tengo reuma, tengo artritis y pronto voy a ingresar porque me voy a operar de hernia y apendicitis. Ahora una fuerte hepatitis me produce calentura. Y dice el doctor Ventura que si no me pongo duro, en este año seguro vuelo en una sepultura.
Canta el gallo de morón son montuno. Canta el gallo de morón por mi salud. Canta el gallo de morón son montuno. Canta el gallo de morón por mi salud. Canta el gallo de morón son montuno.
Oye cómo canta mi gallo,
Canta el gallo de morón por mi salud.
mi gallo está de pelea.
Canta el gallo de morón son montuno.
Oye cómo canta mi gallo,
Canta el gallo de morón por mi salud.
ese gallo tiene bastante curujey.
Canta el gallo de morón son montuno.
Canta el gallo en la sabana,
Canta el gallo de morón por mi salud.
canta por la madrugada.
Canta el gallo de morón son montuno.
Y las nenas de mi barrio.
We love a prompt start time. Welcome, y'all. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Fatima. I'll be one of your MCs for this National Report Back of the Venceremos Brigade for 53rd year, the African, Indigenous, and Palestinian Brigade, as well as the Queer Brigade. Again, thank you so much for coming. We're going to tell you about why we go to Cuba, Cuban history, and what we do when we're there. But first, we're all going to introduce ourselves, giving you our name, pronouns, the land we're on, and what brigades we've been on. My name is Fatima. My pronouns are she, her. I am on Powhatan land, and I went on the 52nd Brigade, and I went on the 53rd African, Indigenous, and Palestinian Brigade. I'll let Nadat go next.
Thank you, comrade. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I will be your other MC today, and my name is Nadat Liftawiya, and I was a member of the VB 53 African Indigenous Palestinian group. I am a Palestinian, and it was a life-changing opportunity for us. So I will pass it to my next comrade to go.
Hi, I can go next. I am Gabo. I use any pronouns with love and respect. And I am based on Anishinaabe lands, also known as Council of the Three Fires, also known as Chicago. I was on the 53rd Queer Brigade last summer, and I will pass it to my comrade Parker.
Hello, my name is Parker. I use they, he pronouns. I am on Edisto land, also known as Little Country of South Carolina. And I was on the Queer Brigade this past summer. I'll pass it to Angel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angel Marie, pronouns they, them, and I joined the African, Indigenous, and Palestinian Brigade this winter. And I'll pass it off to Marte.
Hi everyone, I'm Marte. Any pronouns are okay for me, but she, her feels extra special. I was on the Queer Brigade, and I live on Creekland, Atlanta area. And I'll pass it to Kels.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kels. I'm in the Florida area, and I was on the 53rd Brigade. I am not sure who hasn't gone yet as far as the hosts. I'll pass it to Ariana.
I think you're talking about me. I think I might be the only REN in this group. I'm double checking right now. Hi, yes, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. My name is Ariane. I am a she, they. I'm currently on Coast Salish land, I think Lachute Seed, north of Seattle. I don't actually live in Seattle. I'm just a participant of this report back. I'm happy to see what y'all are going to come up with. I did go to med school in Cuba, and I am also queer. So I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I wonder what y'all end up reporting about. And yeah, that's it. I don't know what else. I'm happy to connect.
No, you're
If anyone
fine.
wants to,
I didn't
yeah,
want
if
to
anyone wants to know
interrupt
about the
you.
scholarship, let me know.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you, but we're not going to make participants go. Won't have time for all of that. No, that's not your fault at all. Don't feel embarrassed. And we just made a connection for scholarships in Cuba because people definitely want that. Have all our hosts on the run of show gone?
I think Parker and Sulan are next or left.
I think Salon's on tech.
We're done. I already went.
And next slide. You can go ahead and click through to the, yep. So yeah, we will be talking about the history of the Cuban Revolution, explaining what the Venceremos Brigade actually is for folks who don't know. I know it's completely fine if you don't. That's why we're here. What the difference between the rest of the brigades and the 53rd Year Brigades were, and then what we learned around internationalism and solidarity and action in Cuba, health and community care in Cuba, Cuban democracy and political organization, and then the 2026 attacks on Cuban sovereignty that happened while we were in Cuba and after. And then we'll present y'all with a call to action and y'all have a chance to ask us questions. Next slide.
Thank you, Comrade. So we wanted to start this presentation with some curiosity about what you guys have heard about Cuba, like just off the top of your head, from the news, from movies, right? Our media condition us, from something someone might have said. Drop it in the chat, anything that you've heard about it. Don't worry about being right or wrong. We're just interested in learning what people know about Cuba. And we'll wait a few seconds. If you guys could drop it in the chat. What are some things you've heard about Cuba? Maybe it could be about the old car or old cars they have, the classic cars, whatever it is, just drop it in the chat.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, we've heard that as well. Communism hates gay people. They're anti-LGBTQ. Yes, we've heard that as well. They have the best medical education system in the world. Amazing maternal care, yes, and the best cigars. I don't know about that. We weren't able to experience that part, but there's a lot of things that we've heard about Cuba. So thank you guys. Castro was bad. Yeah, Fatima, I've heard that as well. They're under a dictatorship. Thank you, Kels. I appreciate that, guys. Yeah, if we can go to the next slide. There are so many things that we've heard about Cuba. There are many common myths, right? First, that they talk about is dangerous. And it's actually one of the safest places I've ever been or I've ever felt. The biggest risk might be getting overcharged at a bodega. Do Cubans hate Americans? Absolutely not. They're some of the most warmest people, some of the most curious people I've ever met. And they're actually really good and better than I was, to be honest, at separating government from regular people. Is Cuba poor because of socialism? Absolutely not. Cuba's economy is the way it is because of the illegal and violent 60-year US embargo that strangles it. That's the only reason Cuba's economy is the way it is. Is there inequality? Yeah, sure, there's inequality. There's inequality everywhere, and it's complicated, right? There's income gaps, and there's also free and universal healthcare, and there's also free and universal education. So this inequality that they want to fuzz our minds with, condition us with, it doesn't look like the inequality that's here. That's systemic oppression that our people go through on Turtle Island. Is there censorship? Look, all governments censor media. All governments control media. This is a given. It's not unique to Cuba, but it's not the way it looks like here. Cubans still have autonomy, still have integrity in what they report, right? And so, yeah, and finally, queer and trans safety. This is one of the biggest myths I've heard there. And to tie it back to Palestine, just like the myth they did in Palestine that you'll get thrown off rooftops if you're gay, which is such farce, right? Cuba has one of the most progressive LGBTQ laws in all of the hemisphere. They legalize same-sex marriage, state-funded gender-affirming surgery. It's amazing. Is it perfect? No, but by no means is it dangerous. And so that's just the Cuba that we know and love today. And I hope you guys can look through these common myths. Next slide, please.
All right, so I want to go ahead and get into some history of the Cuban Revolution in order to provide you all with the context for why we as the VB go there and why we believe that solidarity with Cuba is so important. Next slide, please. Okay, so we can kind of start with Cuba's resistance to Spanish colonialism. So Cuban history really starts with the indigenous peoples that lived there, which included the Taino and the Caribs. And indigenous people lived there, had their own civilization, um, everything. And but things changed when the Spanish arrived. So Cuba was first claimed by the Spanish in 1492, but it would be around 1511 where there was actually this effort to conquer Cuba. Now, indigenous people resisted. Haute, an indigenous leader, fought a guerrilla war against the Spanish. He came on a boat from Hispaniola and basically fought for a long time against the Spanish colonialists in order to resist being occupied by them. Unfortunately, he was eventually captured and martyred by the Spanish. But that wasn't the end of the story of resistance in Cuba. Of course, like in many other settler colonies, there was a process of genocide of the indigenous peoples. And with the process of genocide underway, there was also the importation of African slaves to the island in order to farm cash crops, which is what colonialists have since found Cuba very useful for. Started with tobacco, then they moved on to sugarcane. And there were a lot of Africans on the island of Cuba that were farming sugarcane for the Spanish. There were slave rebellions on the Cuban island, like Carlota's rebellion and Lucchini's rebellion. So these uprisings were another part of the resistance to Spanish colonialism that occurred on the island. Now, after some of these slave rebellions, there was also several wars of national independence. The first one was the 10 Years' War. And the 10 Years' War, it was called the Big War. It lasted for a long time. And it ultimately ended in a peace negotiation. So the Cuba hadn't gained its independence from that. There's also another smaller one that happened right after that. Antonio Maceo, a Cuban national hero, and his brother Jose participated in that one. But ultimately, in 1895, there was another independence war broke out, and this one was inspired by Jose Marti, who is a huge Cuban, who has become a huge Cuban national hero. Um, and this war ran concurrently with the Spanish-American War, and it ended um, with the United States' victory over Spain in the Spanish-American War, and Spain essentially ceding Cuba to the United States. So Cuba gained its flag independence, but became economically dependent on the US. Next slide. So over the years of Cuban dependence on the United States, the US occupied Guantanamo Bay. It took control over a lot of Cuba's industries, and owned a lot of Cuban land. And it also installed neo-colonial dictators to rule the country. There were multiple of them, but the significant one for us here is Batista, who ruled twice. And the second time, people got fed up. Fidel Castro was one person who tried to use a legal route to go against the Batista regime when it became clear that he was becoming a dictator again. But this didn't work. So Fidel basically decided that it needed to be the Cuban dictatorship had to be overthrown through a revolutionary struggle. And so the Cuban Revolution was the result of this. The Cuban Revolution ended in the late 50s, and it was waged with the promise of land reform, which was a promise that was fulfilled. So land was given to the tillers, the peasantry, and that land that was owned by the United States was in the industries that were owned by the United States were taken back by the Cuban people. And the United States responded to this by waging economic warfare against Cuba by establishing a blockade. Cuba also tried to combat some of the underdevelopment that had been generated by colonialism, and how that affected its people by launching a year of education. So they had a literacy campaign that massively raised the literacy in Cuba so that the overwhelming majority of people on the island could read. In the early 60s, the United States tried to overthrow the Cuban government, trying to get their neo-colony back with the Bay of Pigs invasion. This failed. The Cuban people were able to repel it. And then also, Cuba declared the socialist character of the Cuban Revolution. So from then on, Cuba would be pursuing a socialist path. Next slide, please. Okay, so now Cuba is known for having engaged in acts of international solidarity, literally sending soldiers to fight in national liberation wars around the world, especially in Africa. Cuba really suffered when the USSR fell. That really damaged its economy. And that's known as a special period where Cuba had a very, very hard economic time because of the fall of the USSR. In 2019, there was reforms to Cuba's constitution in order to really further cement the rights of the people within the law of the land. And in 2022, Cuba adopted a new family code, which was one of the most progressive codes in the world, which really enhanced LGBT rights in the country. Next slide, please. So to sum it all up, before the revolution, most of the land owned by the United States, Cubans were in poverty. Many Cubans lived in shacks. The literacy rate was low. After the revolution, they took back the land, they took back the industry, they reduced homelessness to almost nothing, and drastically increased literacy and guaranteed free education, free healthcare, and subsidized housing to the people. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it to the next comrade.
Thank you, comrade. I appreciate you. And so what is actually the Venceremos Brigade? And in 1969, when the U.S. started their illegal and violent full embargo, they cut all ties with Cuba using a full embargo, using travel ban, the works. A bunch of young activists were just not having it. They were going anyway, right? They called themselves the Venceremos Brigade. Venceremos means we shall overcome. And here's another connection to the African diaspora in the United States, because they took this term directly from the civil rights movement. Right. And they didn't go as tourists. They showed up, they grabbed machetes, they started cutting sugarcane right alongside their comrades, their Cuban comrades. They did the brutal work. They showed up, and that was the point. Solidarity is something we earn. It is not something we're given. And who showed up for these brigades? We're talking about Students for Democratic Society, right? That big anti-war student group at the time. We're talking about SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They were really heavy hitters during the civil rights movement. We had the Communist Party show up, Black Panther Party show up, and the Young Lords, which were Puerto Rican organizers at the time. These groups didn't always agree, just like many of our organizations don't always agree. And sometimes these groups actually clashed, pre-island and on island. But on this subject, on challenging this illegal U.S. policy, they found common ground. And this Venceremos Brigades is still going, is still growing. 55 years later, brigades keep showing up. We keep building with them. We keep working with them, as well as, most importantly, building connections that the U.S. government doesn't want us to have. So next slide, please, comrade. So if we're thinking about this going forward, right, who makes up the brigade? I told you about who made up that first set of brigades. And now who's making up the Venceremos Brigade, brigadistas? We are over 10,000 people, 10,000 people who have gone since 1969. 10,000 Americans that are saying this illegal and violent embargo does not speak for me. It's not my values. And like I said, what do we do there when we go? We perform the work alongside our comrades, construction, manufacturing, cleaning up their middle schools. We practice hands-on labor alongside our Cuban comrades. It's a type of solidarity that actually does the talking. It's not talking like we see all these talking heads, right? It is the actual work that's being done. And the people that are doing the work, the people that you see here on this panel representing, we're union leaders, we're artists, we're community organizers, we're teachers and professors. We're just regular folks with jobs trying to make this make sense. So there's not just one type of person who does this. And we're not full-time activists, right? We're just neighbors who can see that this is wrong and we want to do something, and we want people to think differently about this. So yeah, 10,000 regular ass folks over 55 years just showing up with tools, with supplies, and most importantly, with our bodies to show that we are there in solidarity. Next slide, please. And when we're doing this, you know, the thousands of people showing up over the 55 years, showing up with our bodies, with our tools, with our supplies. And what we're doing is we're literally showing up with solidarity in 4K, right? Because of our goals. Our goals are to end this illegal aggressive and violent U.S. blockade of Cuba and all other U.S. imposed travel restrictions on all regime change programs. And number two, we want to end this illegal U.S. military occupation of Guantanamo Bay. Three, we want to remove Cuba from this illegal U.S. State Department's list of state sponsors terrorism. And four, we want to strengthen all the movements for justice within Turtle Island, occupied Turtle Island, through exchange and collaboration and normalcy with Cuba. And those are the goals of the Venceremos Brigade. And we can go to the next.
Yeah, thanks, Nada. That was awesome. Yeah, back to me. So our points of unity for the Venceremos Brigade are kind of like somewhat of one of our shared values. And how are we looking at this trip? How are we avoiding going as tourists and actually going as people who want to be in solidarity with the Cuban people? So one, we believe in Cuba's sovereignty and right to self-determination. The Cuban people are the people who should decide what Cuba looks like, not any other country. We believe in the constitutional right of U.S. citizens to travel, move, and freely associate. It is also us who should decide who we get to be in solidarity with, where we get to go. We believe in internationalist struggle and solidarity. We'll get into that more a little bit later, but this idea that all of our struggles are bound up together, and anything we do to chip away at imperialism and oppression, it chips away at imperialism and oppression for everyone. We believe in building equity and justice in the struggle against capitalism, racism, patriarchy, and colonialism. Again, it's all of us or it's none of us. And we believe that people are not disposable. In the US, they kind of get used to this idea that, like, you know, cars are just going to kill people, or cancer is just going to kill people, or COVID is just going to kill people. And in Cuba, they actually work extremely hard to have extremely good public health, to make sure everybody is taken care of. And that's something that we see every time we go. Next slide. So what we really wanted to discuss the differences between VB53 and the years that went before us. Next slide. And one thing we especially wanted to make sure that everyone knew is that, yes, we had a queer brigade, and yes, we had an African, Indigenous, and Palestinian brigade, but the African, Indigenous, Palestinian brigade was very queer, and the queer brigade had folks of many colors and many nationalities, ethnicities, etc. So it was certainly not mutually exclusive. But never before in the Venceremos Brigade history had these types of affinity groups gone as a brigade. And I think that that was such a powerful experience for folks, because not only are you on liberated land, but you're also doing it with comrades who share your identities, share your experiences, and the distinct type of oppressions that we have and that we share. We're seeing what it's like for that not to exist. So yeah, the Queer Brigade went to celebrate the 26th of July movement. That anniversary, as they went in July, there were 26 of them between 16 and 51. They really wanted to, like we said before, battle that pinkwashing narrative of that communists are anti-gay and anti-queer, and that's certainly not true. The AIP Brigade, they also wanted to connect queer people within the BOB to those being oppressed by the same imperial boot abroad. Could we get the definition of BOB in the chat? And then, yeah, as always, we all brought material aid. We had 37 folks on the AIP Brigade. We went for the 65th anniversary of the Cuban Institute for Friendship of the People, and our ages were 21 to 86. Thank you, Belly of the Beast. Next slide. And I think next comrade. And next slide again. Those are just folks from the Queer Brigade. You can go to the next slide.
So I want to highlight here that the world supports Cuba. Nita, you ready?
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry.
All right, I'll pass it off to you.
Oh, thank you, comrade. I appreciate you. Yes, thank you, Angel. The world does support Cuba. And this ties into that slide earlier that we were talking about, right? The myths that we hear about it. We hear that they're communists and everyone, like they're on this terrorist list, right? But the world as a whole supports Cuba. Okay, year after year after year, the world supports Cuba, and it's only two illegal occupations, colonizers who have voted against the resolution to free Cuba from this illegal and violent blockade. And that has been time and time again, the illegal colonies of Israel and the United Snakes of Israel who have voted against this resolution for 33 years, keeping Cuba in this illegal stronghold. So US refusing to trade with them, and then also intimidating other countries from trading with Cuba as well, right? Deal with them. If they want to trade with Cuba, then they'll have to deal with the US. And as this big bully, we understand that countries don't want to deal with that, right? Because the United Snakes is a big bully, and so they don't want to deal with being put on sponsor lists just like Cuba, or having their own blockades just like Cuba, right? So it gives the US continued cover to keep this illegal pressure on them. And what this looks like for Cubans is that there's billions of dollars lost, money that could go to schools, hospital, housing, it's all gone. What that means is that food and medicine is blocked. Ships are being turned away every day because of this. And companies are threatened if they're trying to get children's food or ventilators to them. That means there's blackouts all the time. We experienced it. I'll speak for the AIP brigade. We experienced blackouts regularly, right? That means there's stops in transportation because there's no fuel. So buses can't run, cars can't run, people can't get to work, children can't get to school. That also means that Guantanamo Bay is still illegally occupied by the US military. And so this shows that these two illegal colonies are creating havoc on this island that the whole world wants to see succeed. Next slide, please. And that's an example of all the countries of the world voting for Cuba's revival and life, while we see the two murdering nations vote against it time after time for 33 years. Next slide, please. Yeah. This is our comrade from Code Pink talking about how Israel loves blockades and loves sieges, right? Because they have been doing it to Palestinians themselves, and just from the playbook of this illegal colony of the United States. Next slide, please. And so as a Palestinian, and I have to say this, and I say this all the time, being Palestinian is one of my biggest honors of my life, and also at the same time, one of the biggest responsibilities I hold. And so it's so beautiful for me as a Palestinian. Growing up, my father had a picture of Che and Fidel in his office, so I always grew up thinking that they were uncles of mine. And yet they have been in solidarity with Palestine since the beginning of this illegal occupation of my homeland. Since 1947, Cuba voted against the UN resolution, the resolution giving away my homeland. And that didn't stop. That continued. In 1959, right after the revolution, Che Guevara actually went and visited Gaza, and he pledged his support. And then right after, I'm sorry, my phone was buzzing. I want to check. And right after that, after Che went to Gaza, Yasser Arafat, just the next year after that, went and visited Havana. And when that happened, Cuba recognized the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Movement, and opened diplomatic offices in Cuba. It was beautiful. And then our partnership has never ended. Since 1989, 82 until right now, Cuba has offered thousands and thousands of scholarships to Palestinian students for medicine, for engineering, for you name it. They're giving them housing, they're giving them education, they're loving them as their own. Okay, and that's been since 1982 nonstop. And then in 2012, Cuba helped Palestine receive diplomatic observer status in the UN, which was a huge deal for Palestinians worldwide. They actively work towards the diplomatic angle of supporting Palestine. 2024 was no different when Cuba was one of the only countries to back South Africa's genocide case against this murderous Israel at the International Court of Justice. So politically, we've seen Cuba be consistent and strong. Fidel and Raul Castro always, as long as I can remember them speaking about Cuba, about Palestine, have always framed the Palestinian struggle as being a struggle that is identical to their own. We are both fighting the US imperialists, and both of us are being strangled by the US blockades and siege of our land for us via Israel. So the Palestinian-Cuban connection continues. I remember walking home from school and passing the Palestinian-Cuban Friendship Association office in Ramallah, who are still, until today, putting out statements condemning this illegal sanction on Cuba and calling for free Cuba from these illegal sanctions and blockades. For me personally, being there on free and liberated land, it was beautiful. I saw how the Cuban people are innovative, they're steadfast, and it reminded me of back home. It reminded me of how strong, steadfast, and resolute Palestinians are, and we have to be. Because of both of our situations, we have to be, because both of our peoples live under conditions that force us to figure it out. And I know we are that thorn in the side of imperialists' hip. And just like my comrade Fatima said, anything to knock down any part of this imperialist structure is a benefit for all oppressed peoples worldwide. Thank you. You can go to the next slide.
Hello, I'm up next. And I think when we talk about sanctions, it's like people imagine that it's like the soft approach, like you're not actually hurting anybody. It's not like actual warfare, but it is warfare. Actually, People's Dispatch had an article about how more sanctions kill more people than warfare do every year. And when we think about who's being affected by these sanctions, it's predominantly children. Cuban healthcare is one of the best and most impressive in the world, and yet since 2014, infant mortality rate has almost doubled. Like it's already way lower than a lot of developed nations, but the fact that it regressed is horrible. And those are all direct effects of the United States sanctions. And another aspect of sanctions is that they drive immigration, which creates I wrote something for this. I said, sanctions also drive immigration, which creates a new source of exploitable labor within the belly of the beast, and sows seeds ripe for xenophobia, drug wars, and new crusades for those that live outside of it. So this is when we're talking about how all the systems are connected with each other. It's like all the same fight. And for that reason, I include this quote from Madeleine Albright about the sanctions during the Iraq War. They caused 500,000 children to die as a direct result of it, and her response was that it was necessary. So that's what we're dealing with. And we also think of sanctions as an international problem, like other people are affected by it, and that's horrible, obviously, but it's starting to, imperial boomerang is starting to come home as well, with Minnesota being sanctioned recently for them declaring their own sovereignty and saying, like, we're not going to be invaded. And Illinois has also been threatened with sanctions. There was a quote from somebody in Minnesota that said, they may not be bombing our hospitals, but they are defunding them. And we can go to the next slide.
All right, y'all. I want to go ahead and place this quote from our Venceremos Brigade. This brigade is more than a solidarity trip. It is a strategic gathering. We are frontline organizers who build lasting relationships and coordinated strategy grounded in the lessons of a revolution that has resisted imperialism for decades and stood unequivocally with global liberation struggles from Angola to Turtle Island to Palestine. So I am with the AIP Brigade, and in the early hours of January 3rd, we received news about the imperialist strikes that the United States launched against Venezuela, kidnapping the president along with his wife. This is a war crime that resulted in the deaths of 32 Cuban soldiers and 24 Venezuelan security officials. I remember how we all were that morning. We knew, we were very aware of the increasing aggressions that the United States empire held towards the region, and we, as anti-imperialists, were opposed to it. But we still grieved. We still held each other. We still cried, but we didn't allow those emotions to arrest us. So we mobilized. We responded swiftly. We gathered what we could to make signs, to make posters. We hoisted our flags, and we went to stand alongside the Cuban people to protest the US Embassy and condemn the imperial invasion, to demand the sovereignty of Venezuela, of Palestine, of Cuba, of all free people in the world. Now, as this is happening, the United States is releasing a statement telling Americans to remain indoors if you are on the island, saying to avoid public officials, to avoid crowds, to avoid public servants, as if this was a dangerous occasion, which scared a lot of our families and friends back home. Now, the other thing with the blockade, in addition to power outages, water, lack of running water, we also had very limited communication. So we were unable to reach our loved ones inside the US empire to tell them that we were okay, that we were safe, that everything was okay. But the reality, right, is that we demonstrated that international solidarity. There were all kinds of Cubans, all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of professions calling to condemn these violent actions, that we were calling for the freedom of the Venezuelan people. And it was, a lot of us are organizers, a lot of us are activists, and we are fairly experienced, I would say, in mobilizing and engaging in protests and direct actions. This was the safest that we had ever felt, protesting and advocating for anti-imperialism. So very, very interesting when you observe what the US state media says about the island versus the actual reality on the ground. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to my comrade.
Hello, back to me. I'm gonna talk about how both groups met the combatants who fought in slash for Cuba and how they fought for other people's liberation struggles around the world. I think one really important aspect I took from the conversation was all the different roles that were required for even just like the initial Cuban Revolution. We were speaking a lot about the people who were living in the mountains and actually carried out the like guerrilla warfare, but we were asking like how did they know where to organize, like what was happening, and they mentioned that the clandestine army was like vital to the success of the revolution, which means it was like a network of essentially spies or people working underground within society to be able to like just continue to act like everything was normal while helping out the what are they called? In the Monte, just people living out there. I forget what the word they use in Cuba is for like the foresty part. But when we think about how we fit into the struggle or into the revolution, I think it's vital to hear these stories. Another like beautiful moment we shared was that they presented Kiki, who is Palestinian. They gave her a medal of like honor. I'm not sure exactly what kind of award it was, but it was a military award for being a combatant herself and for being Palestinian and living in an active war zone. And it was a very beautiful moment. Can we go to the next slide, please? And on the Queer Brigade, we were building, thank you, Jada. On the Queer Brigade, we were also building more international solidarity. In the 26th of July celebration, we were joined with other brigades from around the world. So there was some from Europe, like Basque Country, which cool that they're doing that. And Brazilian delegation, Haitian delegation, Mexican delegation. It was a lot of people. And we were also joined by the Cuban president, Miguel Diaz-Canel. And everybody gave speeches. BB gave a speech where Sulan presented representing BB, and it was beautiful. It was very moving. Claudia de la Cruz also gave a speech representing the Socialist Party of the United States and connecting all of our struggles together. There was a moment where we were all chanting, we were in South America, but chanting for a free Palestine, all like, and I could feel the room vibrating with the energy of like the potential for a new world. It was very beautiful. And in Miguel Diaz-Canel's speech, he was talking about the ways Cuba is overcoming US aggressions. So in 12 months, Cuba had gone from 5.8 to 20% solar powered. And this was way before even like the new oil sanctions that they placed on Cuba. So they've state planning. It's amazing. Get into it. And they were talking about how new outlets are required. So that's why they were investing in these solar parks. But that's a lot in part to Chinese investment and like foreign investment. So that also gets to that idea of like international solidarity. We need to be developing these friendships. And I can move on to the next slide, please. And now for some solidarity back home, where after we got back from the trip, we were trying to connect the ongoing attacks with Cuba to the ongoing attacks on queer and trans people in the United States. As they're losing access to care, we wanted to show people like the possibilities of what is available in a society that cares about you. We're going to be talking about the medical developments a little later in the presentation. This was a political education and dance workshops with beautiful and spectacular performances from Chicago drag queens. It was kind of like when you put the medicine inside a cheese so that the dog eats it, because you need both, but the cheese makes it go down a lot smoother. And that's another lesson that we learned is like meet people where we're at and talk about that later. We split the profits 50-50 from this event in order to get at that idea again of like we are in solidarity. And another cool thing that we're doing from within the belly of the beast is that the queer and AIP brigades have been tasked with writing a book about our experiences to bring back. So stay tuned for that. I think the release is in July to coincide with Fidel's birthday. Next slide.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about structures of health and community care in Cuba. But first, I kind of wanted to have a little moment for us to engage with each other over what does our experiences with healthcare look like in the so-called United States? Like, what does our access to care look like from our government or from corporations? And then also, what conditions cause us to have to rely on community care so heavily? You guys can come off mute or you can type in the chat, either way. I see privileged, I see racist. Yep.
I'll come off mute. I think a lot of us, one, we're scared to go to the doctor because we don't know how much it'll cost. It could be some ridiculous amount. We also don't know how we'll be treated, if we'll be treated with respect. So a lot of people just don't go to the doctor, even if they have serious conditions.
Yeah, thanks so much,
100%.
Parker. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I also I feel like, especially for African and marginalized communities, there's so much medical gaslighting. Like someone's pain isn't real, or something that's they're feeling is just like dismissed, and no one is taken seriously. Another thing I about the U.S. is like we don't know our doctors, and our doctors don't know us. You know, we're just like another file for them, which is so bizarre because they're like helping us with our most personal uh, thing is our health. So yeah, thank you.
Looking in the chat, a lot of people are saying it's expensive, they don't have health care, they don't have health insurance, that it's inconsistent and dependent on work status, that's fundamentally attached to labor, there's a long wait times, and the healthcare professionals are very dismissive. That's debt inducing, worse than student loans in some cases. Others have pointed to the fascists in chief cutting Medicare and Medicaid, millions of people losing health care. One person has shared that they're paying $1,000 a month for a family of 4, and they still have to pay out of pocket for medications and emergency care. Others say there's a lot of patients being excluded within medical research, and that the healthcare industry, how devastating that we describe it as an industry, is incredibly fatphobic.
These are all very good and very accurate. Does anybody else, any attendees, want to come off mute and share? Otherwise, we can move forward in a second. But feel free to speak if you feel led. Undercoverage for mental health services is huge. Okay, so yeah, and no preventative care. That's a big one. All right, I am going to head into the part where we talk about what we could experience in a better situation and what Cuba is showing us as an example. So next slide, please. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, was a member of the Queer Brigade. So we were there in July, and a really big focus of our brigade was to learn a lot about community care systems and healthcare systems, both for queer people, but also for all Cubans. So one of the places that we went was a gynecological hospital where we were able to meet with 2 doctors who had been working at that hospital for decades. And we learned a lot about the structures of maternal health care and infant health care in Cuba, as well as the medical system in general. So we learned that healthcare is free and accessible to everyone, whether that be citizens, whether that be immigrants and visitors. I do think visitors have to pay for healthcare. I don't think that that is accurate. That was added into the slide, but citizens do access completely free healthcare, no matter what, and there's no limit on that. Cuba has an incredibly low infant mortality rate, and that has been dropping and dropping because of the incredible advancements in maternal care by the Cuban healthcare system. The life expectancy and mortality rates for infants are comparable to the wealthiest nations in the world. So like the European countries that we see as kind of being examples of good health and of good quality of life, Cuba is right there with these rates of infant mortality and life expectancy. And the infant mortality rate is the same across the entire island. So it's not even that there are certain disparities in more rural areas that makes it so only people in cities have good birth outcomes. This is something that they have created system of maternal health care that is successful across the country. And then something that we were really struck by as the members of the Queer Brigade is the way that the doctors were talking about their relationships with the patients. So doctors have been treating the same families in the certain neighborhood area where they serve for decades. So the older doctor was telling us, like, I delivered this baby, and then a few like, decades later, she came back and had her own baby. And I know this family, and I know their healthcare situations, and I know how to care for them when they come in. So that's kind of that preventative care piece that we really don't access in the United States. The concept of your doctor really knowing how to best care for you even before you have like an emergency happen. And we were also just really emotionally overwhelmed by the amount of availability and access of Cuban healthcare to everyone there. There were many of us who are personally disabled or have disabled loved ones who know how exhausting it is to try to access quality care in the so-called US. And the way that our doctors are motivated by profit. So it's not necessarily we're getting the best treatment because they know that this is the best treatment for us, but it might be that it's the more expensive treatment or it's the treatment that keeps us coming back. And so it was a really powerful experience to see just how drastically different the healthcare system was and the maternal and infant mortality rates were in Cuba from where we have to live in the imperial core. Next slide, please. So we also visited a clinic for folks with HIV and AIDS, and we learned about the success of the Cuban medical system's AIDS prevention efforts. Cuba successfully ended the spread of HIV through childbirth, so from parent to child, in 2015, which is something that is not a thing in the majority of the world. And they expect HIV to no longer be something that people have to deal with in Cuba by 2030. The clinic that we went to was beautiful. They gave us all condoms as a welcoming gift, and it was a really, really sweet, warm space. And they are staffed with several social workers and health educators who do basically outreach and case management for folks with HIV, because the way that they have maintained control and management over HIV in the country is that they are not anymore responding to a crisis, but they are just making sure people keep getting their meds and that they're supported socially and taken care of. And it was really beautiful to see. Next slide, please. Okay. I think, Gabo, were you going to share about this one?
Yes, I'm going to talk about Transcuba and ProSalud, as well as other specific organizations that cater to specific groups within Cuba. So Transcuba is for trans Cubans, as the name implies, and it's centered around advocacy and also public educations. And one of the things that we learned from these groups is that if you want to engage with communities, you really need to know what language they're using, as well as speaking directly to them and where they're going to be at. They told us about this Pro Salud campaign that was geared towards high school students. And part of that campaign was they actually went to high schools and engaged with them to get language that the students would be using so that they recognized it. And by doing so, they also felt like they were taking part in it, which is what super democratic. It's like if people feel like they're actually being heard, they're going to be very excited to participate in these things. And we'll get more into that during the family codes and how sex help that, but that's a little bit later down the line. And I think that's all I have to say about this for now. Could we go to the next slide?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about probably my favorite experience of meeting folks that I had in Cuba. The connection that was the most impactful for me was meeting the Grupo Transmasculinos de Cuba, which translates to the group of transmasculine people in Cuba. And it is a community care network that steps in for trans people specifically, but also the trans community in general, when the conditions of the blockade on Cuba make it so that resources are not as accessible as they would ideally be, the way that the Cuban government wants the conditions to be. And so this group is able to serve many functions. They do advocacy, they go meet with trans leaders from other Latin American countries, and they regularly meet with Cinesex and other organizations advancing the well-being of the queer community in general, but they also do a lot of internal community work, so leading a lot of trainings and workshops across the country, not just in urban areas, but in various small municipalities. They lead events where they talk about sexual health, mental health, education, trans people in sports, all types of topics. I included the picture in the middle because it was so beautiful to me to see trans elders featured in their organization and in their community. That's not something that I personally see very much in the United States because of how many trans elders are not alive. And so that was really beautiful to me. They also supply a lot of material aid in terms of both HRT, but also other gender affirming items. And one of the really cool things that I learned about with them is that they do like accompaniment to gender affirming healthcare, like medical visits. And so they'll go in groups and be emotional support and advocates for each other, which makes it something that is more accessible to everyone when they are pursuing gender affirming care. So it was a really beautiful thing for me to meet and talk with these guys. At the bottom is a picture of us talking with them, and we met at an event where they launched they didn't launch it, but there was a coalition of people that launched a book about the advancement of queer rights in Cuba, and they were at this event, and so we got to connect with them, and we talked with them later. And it was just really beautiful for me as someone who does a lot of mutual aid and community care within the trans community in the so-called United States to see people who are very aligned with the type of care that I find myself doing, who are revolutionary people participating in the revolution by also filling in the gaps that the US government creates in the lives of Cuban people. Next slide. So another organization that we got to connect with in a really beautiful way was Quisicuaba. If you could, yeah, there we go. So they are a cultural and religious organization that is rooted in West African heritage. They have centers in various places in the country where they serve thousands of meals to people every day. They have a lot of really sweet programs for elders where they do like mobility and exercise and healthy eating type stuff and health education for aging people. They provide sexual education and health education for people with HIV/AIDS. They have a lot of social events for disabled adults. But the thing that we were able to witness, which was really beautiful, was the community homes and therapeutic centers that they have. So we were able to go to a center where people lived that were a combination of various populations, but it was people who otherwise were more at risk of homelessness or formerly homeless. It was aging elders who lacked family support. It was disabled adults who needed a little bit of extra like support and couldn't live by themselves. And it was a really, really beautiful experience for me as someone who works with a lot of these populations back home. I honestly was overcome. I started crying when I was there because I was seeing, and it was kind of like you can see with the building, it's like a mostly like outdoor area, like the hallways are outside, and there was rocking chairs everywhere, and it was just a bunch of like folks sitting in the sunshine in the rocking chairs. Some of them were making art, and some of them were just talking and listening to music. And it really overcame me because at home I see these people living on the streets and dying before they can access life-saving healthcare and not being able to access mental health care or therapy. And this is not something that Cuba allows to happen to its people. And this was the solution that Cuba provides. And yeah, it was really, really beautiful to see. And it encouraged me and reminded me of what I work towards here because another option exists for neglected members of society. So yeah, that's Kisikwaba. If we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, I'm gonna pass it on to Gabo. No,
I start.
Angel, go ahead. My bad.
So I want to take this moment to ask y'all, how do you think that democracy looks like in Cuba? And how do you think they organize politically, elections, referendums, etc.? Let me know in the chat or feel free to come off mute. Again, we're taking a time to ask participants, what do you think democracy looks like in Cuba? Some people are saying it's for the people. Others say they vote by districts or towns. I'm seeing all people get a vote in a countrywide law. Others are saying money doesn't buy elections. Others say that you can vote on universal health care, universal education. Okay. All right. Anyone want to come off mute? Going once, going twice. All right, let's go ahead and hop into this section and learn together. So we're going to go ahead and focus on presidential elections for this section. Elections are held in this structure, all right, at the municipal, provincial, and national levels. So you start with the CDR, which is the Committee for Defense and Revolution. This exists in every building and in every organization. So the smallest unit that people are in, buildings like apartment buildings, and organizations like unions and student groups all have a voting block. And so when you have a collection of these CDRs, that forms a voting district. And then these various voting districts form a municipality. Those municipalities, for 168 municipalities, you get a province. And this creates the National Assembly of People's Power. It's the supreme organ of power of the state. This represents the entire population and is an expression of their sovereignty. So rather than having a voting district that's gerrymandered, that's based on income or race or other indicators of socioeconomic status that changes depending on the political climate, usually by more conservative groups. You have districts based on directly of organizers of households, of different unions. So it's a really interesting structure that allows for more democracy. And so then these committees will nominate a delegate for the municipality and organization to attend the Assembly of People's Power. And the Municipality Election Committee and the Provincial Election Committee study the nominees and submit those learnings to the National Election Committee. This committee will then analyze the information provided by both committees and nominate the best candidates for president. And these nominations are then returned to the General Assembly to reach a final decision via vote. Now, we want to note there is no financial incentive for these delegates. Everyone nominated for the presidential election or those serving on various election committees and voting districts, this is all volunteer. These people have regular everyday jobs, whether it's working at a fruit market, as a doctor, as a teacher, as a janitor. This is done all voluntarily. They receive regular working compensation while serving their communities, also living in the same communities as their constituents. Here in the United States, our representatives tend to live in gated communities, segregated communities, living amongst wealthier neighborhoods, or maybe having summer homes or condos and high rises. And here, representatives, even the presidents, are everyday working people. It's a collective process. It is a very, very much for the people and by the people. So we're going to go ahead and get into some frequently asked questions. I want us to go ahead and look. I really appreciated people providing some commentary and such. So some simple things. The minimum voting age is younger in Cuba than it is in the United States, where 16 years is the minimum age to participate in elections. And elections for the presidential cycle is done every 5 years instead of done every 4 years in the United States. Now, some people often ask, does a one-party state mean suppression of dissenting ideas? And no, right? The Cuban people see themselves as members of their revolution. And instead of here, where it's like, okay, I'm a Democrat, the Democratic Party says this, I'm a Republican, the Republican Party says that, so I'm going to align myself with those ideas. People have the ideas first without needing to attach themselves to those kind of political labels because they're supporting the overall revolution. And they may have different ideas on how to mitigate certain issues that arise in society, or to introduce new codes, or how to refine laws. But all of that is done in service of the Cuban people and Cuban society. And so with this one, right, there's no opposition party. So how is it democratic? We do see that people vote for candidates at the first stage of the electoral process. They're voting not on who's opposing a different party, but they're voting on candidates that best support their political, economic, and social concerns. And these candidates just have different methods of addressing the needs of those voters. So we can see and recognize here that there is more democracy enjoyed by the people in a one-party state, in a one-party socialist and communist state that Cuba has achieved. And I think it's incredibly commendable. There's a lot of propaganda that we do receive here within the empire that, oh, they're not free, they're not able to democratically engage in their own society, that the revolution suppresses dissent. But when we look here within the United States empire, we don't have the freedom to express our gender identity. We see that we don't have the freedom to participate in boycotts. We've seen the state repress student activists as recently as the encampments, through the Black Lives Matter protests, through the anti-war demonstrations for invasions in Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam. We've seen the suppression of those aligned with the Black liberation struggles, and candidates on both parties advancing capitalist, imperialist agendas against the will of the people. So this is a really great way that we can understand truthfully what democracy means in Cuba and how they organize their democracy politically. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and share it with my comrade.
So the family codes as a case study of Cuban democracy. When we think about how liberalism teaches us to use like identity politics to like fight for our own individual rights, I think John put something good in the chat about that. But that is really just isolating us from each other and making us weaker. The first family code referendum that went through was like in 2018, 2019, that's when they tried to pass it, and it was a failure. Like a lot of people voted against it. So the Cuban government, along with Senasex, reconvened and they had to come up with a strategy. And their new strategy was it's liberation for everybody or liberation for nobody. And the new draft included legalized same-sex marriage, gender-based rights, rights for children, disabled people, elderly caretakers, and surrogates, which thinking about children having rights in the United States is mind-blowing because they are an oppressed class here, oppressed group of people. I don't know if they're a class. And it also introduced 1 year of paid leave for paternity leave. And their explanation of the strategy was people may want to vote against one thing, but they're not going to vote against themselves. So if there's a conservative elder who doesn't want to vote for gay rights, well, they want to be able to have access to their grandchild if like the parents are abusive. So they're going to vote for the elder caretaker rights, even though they feel some type of way about legalized same-sex marriage. Whereas I think that the way we approach, or at least the way Democrats want us to approach democracy, it's like, who are we going to put on the chopping block next? Like, what group are we going to sacrifice? So it's a great way to approach it. And to get into how democratic it was, 6.4 million people participated in these referendums, which was 75% of the population. 80,000 community meetings were held before 25 drafts were made to finally what it landed on. And another interesting aspect about how they consolidated people's rights into rights for everybody was they grew gender rights with sexual orientation / queer rights because they are all victims of violence or discrimination based on their gender presentation. And that was just like a really innovative way to think of our struggles, I think. And there was also the aspect that, it was interesting that since these referendums or since the family code was passed, gay marriage hasn't really increased in the island. Like there has been more, but it wasn't significant because people are already living their lives as married people. And I think the difference is that in Cuba, you have rights as an individual and you don't need to get married to access that like secondary level of rights that we have in the United States. Like if we think about the queer liberation movement in the United States, it stopped as soon as we got gay marriage, which is like, I don't want to get gay married, so how's that helping me? Um, and that's what I have to say about the family code. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. And then Senasex it's the National Center for Sexual Education in Cuba, but if we think about the organizations like Trans Cuba and I'm blanking on the other name that I just talked about. But if those are the bodies, then Senasex is the head, and these bodies act as individuals, but they also work under Senasex to do the same. Pro Salud, thank you. So they have like they have autonomy, but they are still all working towards the same thing. And they were huge in advising for the family code referendums and the voting. They kind of did the bulk of the work. And when we asked them if the Cuban government is working so hard to integrate queer people into the system, why do you have to have this separate service, like all these separate entities? And the HIV clinic was basically telling us like, well, because we listened to what the Cuban people wanted, and they said that they feel more comfortable still coming here because they haven't experienced like bigotry or like all that stuff that comes from colonialism that they're working on. They feel safe there, so they kept it going. And it's still like they said that they have like 80 workers, but they're doing the job of 130 workers. And this goes back to the effects of sanctions, right? They were talking about how part of the problem for implementing a lot of these strides in democracy is that by the time they train people to implement these new things, they might have immigrated the island to escape the sanctions or to like try and live a full life because of the sanctions. So it's like they have all this brain drain and they've dedicated resources already that they've lost, making it very hard to implement these fantastic things. And I also want to mention one thing about Pro Salud and Transcua, which is that they said that they go into like gay bars and like where people go cruising, like just where they know that people will be that need this information. And it reminded me of Jesus, who went like with the what was like the whores and the cheats. Like we need to go where the people are at. And I'm done.
Okay, so we're gonna kind of move into what things look like currently, as in like the past couple months. And I wanted to kind of hear if people are willing to come off of mute and share like what is your understanding of the recent developments in terms of US aggression against Cuba. Um, yeah, like what's going on? What do you know? What are you confused about? And then we'll get into it. If you come off mute, I'll love you forever, please.
Love me. They're actively starving over 11 million people right now.
Yeah. Any participants want to share? Okay, I see in the chat, Venezuela was a major oil supplier for Cuba. The US is blocking oil ships. The takeover there was a huge problem for power. Yeah, power as in like electrical power. The electric outages and lack of running water is getting worse. Do y'all have an understanding of the escalation towards a US takeover? Like, or have people been seeing what Trump has been saying about that? Okay, I'm gonna get into it then. Oh, okay, I see a couple more things in the chat. So yeah, it's more difficult for hospitals to receive medical supplies. It's more difficult for Cuba to receive everything. What happened to the Russian oil ship that was heading to Cuba? Did the US threaten the ship near Cuba? I personally I saw that they were headed there, and then I saw reporting on it that the oil ship turned around, but I didn't get a chance to look into if there was a reason given. Um, no oil, no gas, no transportation, no deliveries for supplies and food. It was mentioned that Mexico also agreed not to supply oil. Yeah, so let's get into kind of the key points here, if I could get the slide. Okay, so yeah, the US invaded Venezuela, and Venezuela was the main supplier of oil to Cuba, which is the primary fuel source that Cuba uses for powering all of its functions. Um, and as they invaded, the US government also imposed a fuel blockade on Venezuelan oil, as in they are literally outside of Cuba, outside of Cuban national waters, with Navy ships guarding the water so that ships with oil cannot get in. Um, and they have also intercepted shipments of oil to Cuba from other countries. So they intercepted a ship from Mexico. Um, and they're threatening tariffs and blockades on countries trying to supply emergency oil. So they're basically saying, in the same way that they have with other situations in the past, like if you, they used to say, like, or they still say, if you trade with Cuba, then we won't trade with you. Like you can't have an economic relationship with the US if you have an economic relationship with Cuba. But now it's like if you are sending emergency oil or food or anything to Cuba, then we're cutting off a relationship with you, and we're going to make a blockade for you as well, which threatens the well-being of other nations. If I could change the slide, please. So this has created, in addition to what was already happening, there used to be multiple blackouts per day in Cuba for most people. Like that was normal because a fuel shortage has been a thing for a long time. But this has escalated into an energy crisis as this new Venezuelan oil blockade has kind of descended. So there's not vehicles, like vehicles are not able to move around, so public transportation is gone. Um, Food production is greatly limited because of lack of access to energy sources. Schools have shut down with their operations. Trash is not being collected, so there's trash piling up in the streets. Hospitals are not able to function for most of their operations besides super emergency things. The tourism industry is kind of shutting down right now because they don't even have the ability to sustain their own people, let alone welcome tourists, which the tourism industry is one of the primary sources of income for Cuba, since a lot of countries won't trade with Cuba. But people do come as tourists from other countries. So the tourism industry is a huge concern when that shuts down. And then water access is very threatened. So straight up, this blockade is a genocidal tactic, and it has been a genocidal tactic. And we are now seeing worse and worse in front of our eyes. Like, this is the play out of the genocidal conditions that the US is imposing on the Cuban people as some sort of cruel and confusing punishment for crimes that the US perceives Cuba to be committing. All right, next slide, please. So there was also an attempted invasion of Cuba by Americans. So about 10 people were caught trying to drive a boat that was registered in Florida into Cuban waters, which is illegal. And a Cuban on the island was found to be helping them out with the logistics of that. So that happened on February 25th. And there is belief that that is tied to the US government, but that isn't 100% certain. Next slide. And like I said, the US is threatening blockades on all countries that try to help Cuba out right now. So not only does that mean that they're not willing to send food or send oil, but also there are programs of international solidarity that were mentioned previously with a lot of Latin American countries that are now being cut off because those countries are feeling a lot of pressure from the United States. So there is a Cuban medical mission program where it's very common in a lot of Latin American countries for Cuban doctors to be there working as a sort of extending of international solidarity from Cuba to other countries whose medical systems need support and need more doctors. And several countries have terminated that program in their countries in the past few weeks because the United States is pressuring them to do that. Which means that the Cuban doctors working in the hospitals are having to leave, but also the peoples within those countries are now at more medical risk and are receiving less care because the United States is punishing everyone for some hypothetical stuff. Yeah, so that is the pressure that is on allies of Cuba. Next slide, please. And the US empire is doing this for a very clear reason, and this has been a reason for a long time. When the blockade policies were first established decades and decades ago, there were statements that were very direct from US presidents and political leaders that the goal of the blockade, the goal of cutting off economic access to Cuba, is to starve the Cuban people so much that they blame their own government and overthrow it so that the United States doesn't have to be the one to overthrow it. And that was actually because the United States was failing to do that. There were like 200 something attempts on Fidel Castro's life by the US government, and it wasn't working. And so they were like, okay, we're just going to starve them until they give up. And that continues to be the strategy of the US government. And it has escalated with statements that Trump has been making. So he's telling Cuba, you need to make a deal before it's too late, or else we're going to do a quote unquote friendly takeover. Last week, he was at an assembly of right-wing leaders in Florida, and he said, guys, don't worry. I'm going to take care of it. Cuba's not going to be a problem for us anymore soon, and Cuba is in its last moments of life. And he has publicly stated that they are trying to see a regime change in Cuba by the end of 2026, that the United States will take over Cuba by the end of 2026. Yeah, I'm going to check the chat real quick and see if people are contributing about this section. Okay, so John says that the men who assaulted Cubans from that boat were treated medically after their attempts to kill Cubans. This is an example of the beauty of Cuba. I'm just gonna say that. Um, yeah, a militarized boat would be able to leave the militarized waters of Cuba with no one noticing. Or the waters of Florida, I'm sorry. Yeah. And that's where it gets a little strange. But yeah, Sicily and Italy is refusing to shut down their doctor exchange program from Cuba. And they are using the same tactics in Iran. All right. So this is kind of the current situation that Cuba finds itself in relation to the US continuing to pressure it towards collapsing. I'm going to pass it to my comrade for the next section.
Thank you, comrade. It's so disheartening to see these same tactics happening across the globe, affecting all people by this imperial government. So I appreciate that update on what's going on currently. So thank you guys so much. I'm gonna start talking about how we can start or continue showing up and being in solidarity with the Cuban people. Next slide, please, comrade. Let me check my text really quick. So this is some ways that you guys can get involved and strengthen this solidarity and partnership we have with the free and liberated Cubans. The QR code on the left is for a toolkit for the week of action for Cuba. So what's happening, and for those who don't know, it's already started, and you guys are actually a part of it right now. We are all a part of the week of action for Cuba on this report back. It started on March 8th and it goes until March 15th. There's so much happening this week for Cuba. Like I said, our report back is one of them. There's also the Action Conference for Cuba, U.S. normalization conference happening right now in New York. Right now, people are meeting to help build this normalization between these two nations. So please go scan this QR code and check out the toolkit. Also, join actions that are near you in whatever capacity that you have, right? You can host an event, you can donate to a fundraiser, you can repost something on your socials. Anything and everything matters when it comes to helping support Cuban liberation. So that's the QR code on the left. The QR code on the right is a QR code that will take you directly to donate to the Venceremos Brigades. And what this will do is help us continue sending delegations, sending much needed medical aid and food aid and other types of aid, material aid to Cuba through the Venceremos Brigades. This will help us continue sending delegations and helping with the work and doing that imperative building and continuing growing our relationship with the free peoples of Cuba. So this work must continue, and it would be great if you guys can help strengthen those bonds. Next slide, comrade. Thank you. And then also the two other QR codes, the one on the left is a fundraiser happening right now to send solar panels and generators to Cuban hospitals. And so they're trying to build their self-sufficiency from oil and those type of energies and create a solar paneled sufficiency in Cuba. And so that will help donate to that project. And the QR code on the right is a petition that's helping, that's going around, and it's called Let Cuba Live. And we are collecting petition signatures to send to this clown in the White House to stop this illegal and violent blockade against our Cuban comrades. Next slide, comrade. And finally, and most exciting news is that the next brigade, Venceremos Brigade, delegation is going to have the applications for VB 54. And this is a special one because it is the 100th anniversary of Fidel. And so it's going to be a historic brigade, 150 brigadistas going together in August. And so if you are able, with the capacity that you hold, to apply, please do so. Applications will open on March 15th. And we're so excited to continue growing and learning with you. And this brigade, specifically because of how powerful and historic it is, it's going to be in partnership with the National Network on Cuba. So we're really excited for that to start. Next slide.
Before you move on to the next slide, just something to add for this brigade.
Thank you, Jada.
Our goal is to reach 150 people. And so like it's really going to be super important to be like on our fundraising. And so like if you're not able to come to the brigade, we really ask you to help us be able to fundraise so that we can bring 150 people with thousands and thousands of pounds of material aid that we know Cubans need. We also know that next week on March 21st, thousands of people from across the world will be descending on Havana for the Nuestra Americas flotilla, bringing, I think, over 20 tons of material aid to Cuba. And so, like, this is a part of our obligation as folks being in the Imperial Corps, living in the United States, is not just to, like, go to Cuba and like learn about Cuba, but at the end of the day, like we're coming back to organize our people to end the blockade on Cuba, and us bringing our folks with us is just one part of that. Bringing material aid is one part of that, and this report back is an obligation that we have from the Cuban people in order to tell y'all about our experiences and keep y'all involved in the Cuba Solidarity movement. And so this brigade is super, super important to continuing this legacy, especially being what is happening right now. We don't know what our travel situation is going to look like in August, and that's just on the real. So, like, it's going to be on us to be a little bit flexible, but we still want to make sure that we are bringing like our 150 people with all of our material aid, and not just bringing organizers. Bring your degular people who may not know of as much about Cuba. Like, it's great to get a room full of organizers, but we also want to make sure that we're extending these opportunities to people who are like new in our spaces. And this brigade is a perfect opportunity for folks to be able to see Cuba, to learn about Fidel's contributions to Cuba, and also to be held by by the container of a brigade that has been here for decades, while also building out like younger folks who the Cuba Solidarity movement is going to be passed off to. Our elders have done the work of holding this for the past 60 years, and now it is on us to continue that work. And so hope that y'all will be able to come on this brigade. The dates are August 1st through the 15th. We will be having a national open house later in March. The applications close April 1st, so it's a quick turnaround to get your application in. But yeah, if you have any questions regarding this application, feel free to email us. I'll drop our email in the chat. But yeah, we really need help getting our folks here.
Thank you, Jada. And with that, we want to give folks some time to ask their questions. Initially, we said if anything came up for you during the fact versus fiction portion or the history portion that you either had questions about that we didn't answer, or if there's any thing that you heard about Cuba that you want to know if it's true, if we can answer it, we will. And also feel free to ask us about what it's been like for us to go to Cuba, or what it would be like for you to go on the next brigade.
You cannot flush toilet paper down the toilet. Do not do that if you go to Cuba. The pipes are old because of the sanctions. I will say Queer Brigade did not have this issue. We listened to the directions. So shout out Queer Brigade.
That made it sound like another brigade did. Certainly not ours. So
Okay. So then
just want to
53 was
clarify.
good. Okay, 53 is good. Seems like this was an issue in previous years.
We have a question in the chat, which is, what was the hardest experience for y'all there?
I can say, honestly, the hardest experience for me was leaving. I did not want to leave, even with the outages. I felt like a human being. It felt beautiful to be free, to be on liberated land, to be in a nation that prioritizes the people, right? And I could understand why so many of our, freedom fighters or resistance fighters would, come to Cuba escaping, the persecution of the U.S. empire. But I recognize, and as we recognize as brigadistas, it's very important for us to return back to the belly of the beast, to take the lessons that we've learned to both end this blockade, but also to share strategies to develop a revolutionary future alongside our comrades, our friends, families, our neighbors.
Kels, you can go.
Yeah, thank you. I want to add, I guess, for me, as a more introverted person, I think I struggled a bit with the various personalities on the brigade. But I will say that what really, really, really helped me was the the responsables. They put on preparation sessions in order to like ground us and prepare us for the trip getting there. And I got to know some of the other brigadistas through that. And found that a lot of the folks were really genuinely kind and open people. And it helped me kind of um relax a little bit more. So I'd say for the shy folks out there or the introverts out there, yeah, there is definitely support for that if needed. And I will yield.
Yeah, I'll go next. Again, I'm Fatima, she, her. Yeah, I think the hardest things for me is one, that day that Maduro and Celia Flores were captured was like, felt absolutely chaotic in the sense that like it was such a major escalation that I did not know was on the horizon. And just folks were very emotional. We didn't know if it was going to affect us getting back into the US, like what was going to happen. And I was like, how are we going to hold each other throughout this? And we did. And the Cubans held us. And that was probably like the most memorable day because we got to see the political clarity of like Cubans jumped into action immediately, were protesting and held a rally. And like Angel said, is like with the safest we've ever felt at a rally, and like just seeing the political clarity of like knowing how to react during chaos. And then also, as folks said in the chat, like coming back and trying to readjust to like people are disposable here. Like I live in Richmond, Virginia, and we had, while I was gone, it was about 8 people were killed in as pedestrians by cars, and like no one seems, not no one, but like almost no one cares, and very little is being done. That's like an immediate response. Like there's so many things that you could do to immediately respond, and those things aren't being done. And it just feels like, and when I got back, I found out about that this had happened, and like I went for a run and I almost got hit by a car like 3 times. So yeah, it's like people don't give a fuck, and pardon my language. So that was hard, and it still is.
Marte?
Yeah, for me, I think it was a lot like the most difficult part was definitely um like the barriers that the like the rules that the US has when it comes to bringing stuff back, and also just the whole like I guess general climate of like coming back into the country because of the way that the United States doesn't want people to travel or engage with Cuba. So for example, I had this really cool fan that I had gotten like while I was on the trip, and I couldn't bring that back because it was made out of like natural materials, and the United States doesn't want people bringing anything that could be construed as an agricultural product back into the US from Cuba. And so it was very sad because I mean, like these things are an example of like the craftsmanship of the Cuban people, and that's not something that really I could bring back and share with people because um, of the US. And also just like getting back, like coming back, like I wasn't on the AIP brigade, I was on the Queer Brigade. So I imagine that maybe this was a worse thing for them, but this was my first brigade and I was worried. Like the United States does like sometimes like harass people when they come back into the country, even though they have to let them back in. They will sometimes like detain people and do stuff like that. So it was nothing happened, but like it was like a concern of like what will happen when coming back. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that those were the hardest parts for me.
I I feel like unpacking my own American exceptionalism was a huge task getting there, and that's already something that I was working on coming to the island. And I went in actively telling myself, don't assume things, ask questions because like you don't know. But even with this, there was m multiple moments that I just was like, oh, I just felt like a dumbass because I was just like like the questions we were asking or the things we were saying, they weren't like talking down to us, but their response was so like obvious that it was very clear that we've been propagandized for so long. Like I remember somebody was asking, and when we were visiting the gynecology clinic, they said like, oh, so like what are your guys' wait times for these surgeries? Like are there really long waits before people can get their like the stuff that they need? And the doctor like almost seemed kind of confused. And he was like, well, yeah, there are lines, there are queues, but if your surgery is like urgent, you're gonna go in for like before, and if you can wait a little bit, like we're gonna put you a little bit later, but like everybody gets treated. And he was just like, and like as if it wouldn't, like, why would that be an issue? And it's like, duh, that's not going to be an issue. But we've been told that like that's why we can't have healthcare. And I think that even so, that was the issue on the island. But then coming back and bringing this information to Yankees who like are not unpacking their American exceptionalism is like talking to a brick wall sometimes. And it does like you got to come at it like multiple ways to finally get through to somebody. But that's like our job coming back.
There's a question I see in the chat that I find really interesting, and it asks, what kind of activities did y'all do that really made y'all feel like y'all were integrating with regular Cubans, interested in knowing not just talks that y'all attended, right, which talks are great, but they can be one-sided engagements. And my response to this is that these weren't talks, these were actual conversations, especially with the African, Indigenous, and Palestinian Brigade. Something crucial for us as brigadistas on this contingent is that we recognize the impacts of imperialism, capitalism, Zionism, racism. So when we traveled to Cuba in solidarity with the people, we had awareness of the way those structures work to undermine the sovereignty of a nation. And we had a lot of dialogue about how these systems, how to maintain revolutionary systems, and how to best ensure that policies are able to not only protect but advance the needs of the people. I would say that for me in particular, I never felt a part of the Cuban people. I felt like I had like a home that I didn't know I had. And whether we were in political education sessions or grabbing a cup of coffee or getting something to eat, I never felt like an outsider. I never felt like a foreigner. I never felt like a tourist. Um, from the moment we stepped there, even now, that solidarity with the Cuban people is something that is so strong, so inviting. It's not my first time leaving the US empire. There are other places where, especially being African, you recognize that there is the society really reminds you how much that anti-blackness is everywhere. But in Cuba, right, to be African there, it really felt like home.
Marte. And then
Hey, we definitely like went and hung out with like regular people for sure. Like it's just like for example, like on the Queer Brigade, we went to Old Havana and we actually just walked the streets, talked to people. We went on a whole quest to, like for cigars, like in order to get our hands on some of these like famous Cuban cigars. And yeah, I mean like, we talked to people on the streets. Um we it's like, yeah, we engage with regular people. Later during the 26th of July, like the actual day of, like we actually like we went to like there was like this celebration thing that we went to. Um and we danced with people. Like and Cuba's like, I mean, they really get down. Like you know what I'm saying, when it's time to, to let loose, to dance, to listen to music and all of that. So, it was really fun just like I don't know, just like enjoying spending time with people, experiencing joy and celebration. Um some of us got to see drag queens too, which was really cool. Like there was like a club like where like they were doing that. It was just really late at night. I had to leave a little bit early, so I didn't actually like we get to see them physically, but we didn't get to see the presentation, like my half of that group. But yeah, we just like went out and like hung out with people. And so yeah, we definitely got that.
Ooh,
Oh,
I also went
th-
to a gay club
that's
there. It was
that's
amazing.
right. That sounds like a lot of fun. Um, that sounds like a lot of fun, Marte. I'm trying to go up to the question again. Thank you, Kels, for bringing back that question so it doesn't get lost. I really appreciate it. Similar to Ariana's question, what surprised you most, or what was the most memorable experience for you? So, for me, as a Palestinian, one of the most memorable experiences I had was the jarring response my body had to actually be back in a refugee camp, because that's exactly how it felt like being in Cuba. It felt like how it feels when I'm back home in a refugee camp. The blockade and the siege in Cuba felt so familiar to me as a Palestinian. And it was just like so surprising for me that, because growing up in Palestine during the Intifada, I didn't imagine that this was a problem for other people. We were living in this bubble of occupation. So it was just really jarring to my soul to understand that, to know that other people have been suffering the way that we have been suffering for um, uh, 77 years. So that was really a big surprise to my soul to learn that, because it just made it all kind of make sense about, and I'm going to bring this back to what Fatima said earlier about any knock to this imperialist core, anything that we can do to affect it or offend it in any way is going to help free all oppressed people across the world, because these imperialists and fascists use same tactics to control us. So yeah, that surprised me that we were one in a cog. Thank you guys for your questions.
I was gonna bring up 2 points of the last two people who spoke I have thought about. One was that the conversation we were having with people in the streets, Cubans do criticize, like they're allowed to criticize their government. They were telling, like I heard a lot of their complaints and I was like, okay, heard. So it's not like as censored as they say. And on it being like a island concentration camp, I've been learning about indigeneity lately, and this Indigenous reporter I was listening to was talking about how reservations were the first concentration camps in the United States. And when we think about how the United States has harmed indigenous people of the Americas, and now is doing that in Palestine, it is all one system.
Something interesting upon coming back into the belly of the beast, I already held a lot of criticisms towards the United States empire, especially as an African living here. But upon returning everything about the surveillance and the police brutality, the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex, the violence here, as we are an internal colony within this imperialist nation, is so much more heightened. And if anything, it's a reaffirmation of my commitment to engaging in solidarity with the free peoples of the world, reaffirmation of my commitment to Pan-Africanism, anti-Zionism, anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism. And there is a lot of work for us to do to dismantle this empire, but the work is worthwhile. And I really think that we should be inspired by the Cuban Revolution, which has persisted for 67 years. And let's do all that we can to ensure that Cubans remain free, that Palestine is going to be free, that we will free our continent of Africa, we will free every indigenous nation. Everywhere there are free people in the world, we will return to our independence and our sovereignty and really dismantle the empire that has stolen that from us.
Thanks so much, Angel. What a great note to end on. Thank y'all so much again for coming. It is a pleasure to make good on our commitment to the Cuban people, that we will spread the word about the blockade and what it's really like in Cuba. And we really hope to see y'all on the next brigade. Like Jada said, it is also regular folks, not all organizers, not all artists, poets, whatever you might think. It's regular people that go in these brigades, and in some way, shape, or form, it's life-changing for everybody. And don't let a dollar sign stop you. Don't let your political knowledge stop you, your political orientation stop you. We want anybody who is principled to attend this trip, to attend this solidarity trip. And follow the links, keep in touch. Thanks for coming. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.